Welcome to week 2 of our Back to Basics shading tutorial. I'm Brandon from Tattooing 101, and today we are going to go over whip shading and pendulum shading. We're going to be building upon these lessons week by week. So if you haven't seen last week's video, I recommend that you pause this one and go back and check it out. If you've liked these videos and would like to learn more about tattooing, sign up for Tattooing 101 email list. We send out emails each week to improve your tattooing skills. There's a link down below the description for you to sign up. And it's also completely free. As you can see here, I prepared today's drill on fake skin. My setup for today is going to be a Bishop 1 shader, which is 3.5mm strokes. I'm going to use a 10 gauge 15 curved mag and a 10 gauge 27 curved mag. And I'm going to be running my machine on about 7.5 to 8 volts, depending on the size I'm using. So the reason that I'm using bug pin cartridges for this is because I'm able to show you how to do whip shading, but also show you how to do smooth shading with the same cartridge. As a rule of thumb, you want to make sure anytime you're doing black and gray, I like to use bug pins. And for color, I'll use standards, and color packing, I'll use standards as well, which is 12 gauge. Some people like to use standards for traditional style tattoos, but I personally like to use bug pins because you could still see the little dots that make pepper shading, but it just looks a little bit more smooth. So this will depend on the style that you want to do traditional. And then as for my ink setup, I'm going to be using dynamic black. So now let's get started with whip shading. When it comes to the cartridges, I'm going to use the biggest cartridge I possibly can. So with this design, I could pretty much do it all with a 27. So I'm going to show you how to do whip shading with the 27. So the things you want to think about whenever you're starting out is going up to the line. So understanding where your needles are, and we're going to work on this motion right here. So I'm going to go up with my straight black from the bottom of the teeth sections right here. So from right here, I'm putting my needles into the skin, speeding up my hand speed, and lifting out of the skin, right like this. And this is the basic motion for whip shading. As you can see here, it starts out dark, gets lighter, and you can see all the nice little dots, which makes for pepper shading. The most important thing is you want to start working and building up your tones and getting a smooth transition. When you're doing that, I'm letting my needles hang out about 2mm, and you can see I'm not pressing really hard on the fake skin. You just want to go into the skin and start your whipping motion with your hand. You're slowly moving out, creating a transition that you'll be able to see different tones. Then you can start working on having your tones go out further and further when you get the confidence to be able to do it, right like that. So as you can see here, the darkest area on the bottom, and then it goes up to a lighter area. Also, you've probably seen other tutorials on YouTube using gray wash, and you're wondering why I'm saying just to use solid black like I am right here. Well, the reason for that is if you're a beginner, you really want to master shading. It's a very unforgiving method because if you go too dark, you'll be able to see clearly all of the shade marks. So being able to see all the little dots on the fake skin using solid black, you'll be able to clearly see that you're doing it correctly. And it will give you better confidence whenever you are going on to tattooing with black and gray, because you'll understand the natural process of putting in the tones into the skin and being able to see the little dots. So that's why I recommend using solid black when you are first starting to learn how to use mags and do shading. So now I want to hear from you all. What do you feel like the hardest part of shading is when it comes to the actual tattooing process? That way I could check them out and do my best to be able to help you overcome those hurdles. Just let me know in the comments. So now I'm going to show you how to do some pendulum shading. So with this, you want to be whipping out both sides instead of just the one side like you do in whip shading. So now, with our pendulum shading, we could start on this area right here. So I'm going to start off on this line, and you can see here I'm just going back and forth, very lightly touching the skin. Biggest thing with shading is you don't want to be too harsh on the skin or it's going to overwork it completely. So I'm just very lightly building up my tones over time. And then we could do some cross hatching. This will help smooth out the needle marks so they're not all facing one direction, and it'll help it look more smooth. You can see that I'm turning my mag in my hand when I'm going through with areas to where this mag might be a little bit too big. So I could turn in and be able to get into those hard to reach areas just by turning my mag to the side. So for shading, this part of the tooth is in the background, so this is going to be the darkest area. And this is what's going to help create the depth of the design. So just get used to this process right here, just going back and forth. So now we could just go through and finish off the shading for the design with all the techniques we just learned. So now, some areas we could do whip shading, starting it out like this. And then we could go back through to smooth it all out with some pendulum shading. We're also going to do some cross hatching. So you can see I use both techniques when it comes to doing a tattoo. If I'm up against a solid line, I'll start out with some whip shading and then I'll start smoothing out those tones with the pendulum shading. And the lighter you go, the lighter it's going to be in the skin. Especially if you're using just straight black, you could just very lightly touch the fake skin and it'll lighten up. Or even in human skin, if you go too light, it's going to lighten up because it's not going into the second layer of skin. Now, if you aren't comfortable using a bigger mag, by all means, you could switch out to a smaller mag. But one thing I'd like to point out is the smaller the mag that you do, the less smooth your shading is going to be because there's less surface area being able to hit that area. So if you want really smooth shading, you're going to want to use a bigger mag, but all these techniques you could use with a smaller mag, no problem, just like this. Exact same process, just with smaller needle groupings. And the last thing I would like to briefly touch on would be gray wash. So now that I have all my black put in there, one thing you could do if it's just too hard of a transition is I have myself 6 drops black to distilled water, and you could just go over the design, pendulum shading over it. And what's going to happen is it's going to look a lot more smooth because you're using different tones. So this is something you could introduce practicing as well, which will help smooth out your designs a whole lot more, as you can see here. When it comes to traditional, you just want to focus on using your black, but when it comes to like black and gray and getting comfortable with realism, things like that, you really want to practice with getting smooth blends with gray wash. So we'll just go through here and smooth out our design. So now we can clean it off and see the final product. So there you have it. Just with these two different shading techniques, you could definitely produce a good looking tattoo, along with being able to have nice, smooth transitions. So make sure you join me next week where I'm going to go over exactly how to do dot work shading.